This is the 5-minute guide to the Lion-class battleships of the British Royal Navy. Okay, it might take a bit longer than that, but this is because they might accurately be called the most complicated battleships that were never built. Because of this, I have had to resort to all sorts of places to get some pictures for you. The Lion class started out fairly simply, since the King George V class had gotten just too far down the design line by the time it was clear Japan was not going to stick to the naval treaties. The Royal Navy was left with battleships, armed with 14-inch guns at a time, when the Americans were going for 16-inch weapons using the treaty's escalator clause, and the Japanese seemed to be doing the same. In reality, the Japanese were going for 18-inch guns, which was even worse, but nobody knew that yet. Luckily, the King George V class had originally been designed somewhat larger and trimmed to fit the treaty, so it was relatively simple to dust off some of the older designs, make a few tweaks, and come up with a design that carried 16-inch guns. It was impossible to maintain the same speed and protection on the old 35,000-ton limit, but luckily the escalator clause allowed for heavier ships as well as bigger guns. The 1938 design for the Lion class was in many ways similar to its predecessor. They were 40 feet longer, 2 feet wider, and had 20,000 more horsepower, but on a battleship scale looked almost identical to the older design. The most obvious visual differences were the transom stern, which was a feature that improved the ship's speed for a given amount of power by creating a wake that forced turbulent water away from the stern of the ship without actually weighing anything, and of course the 3 triple turrets carrying the 16-inch guns, a pair super firing forward, and a single turret at the back. They would also be slightly faster with a maximum speed of 30 knots. Secondary armament consisted of 8 dual-purpose twin 5.25-inch turrets and 6 octuple 40mm mounts, 15-inch belt and 6-inch deck armor, as in the King George V made the ships very heavily protected as well. It was intended to build a pair of these ships each year starting in 1938 until 6 ships had been built. The first 2, Lion and Temeraire, were laid down in 1938. The next pair, the Conqueror and Thunderer, had contracts awarded, but were not laid down. The final pair of ships didn't even get that far. This was because with the outbreak of the Second World War, construction was suspended to devote resources to getting other ships closer to completion, into service faster, and repairing war damage, much as had been the fate of the later Revenge-class ships in the First World War. By late 1941 some valuable wartime experience had been gathered, and since nothing major had been built, the design was revised to produce a more effective ship. This included a slight increase in length and a wider beam, to allow for an even more extensive underwater protection system against torpedoes, and the dropping of the requirement to be able to fire the forward turret directly ahead and zero elevation. This meant a flared and raised front could be installed, which would make the ship much better in rough seas, something that was proved in the career of HMS Vanguard, where a similar design of hull meant she stayed combat capable when the accompanying USS Iowa was unable to fire its forward guns due to water pouring over the deck. Aircraft launching facilities were removed due to the improvements in radar, and belt armor was reduced to 14 inches, except over the magazines to save some weight for the other changes. The anti-aircraft armament also increased to 9 octuple and 1 quadruple 40mm mounts. The changes to size and weight meant the ship's speed would drop back to just over 28 knots, but with more space there was also room for more fuel, so the ships could go further. Overall, this new design would weigh about 2,500 tons more at standard displacement. However, as the war progressed and new weapons came about, there was another look at the ship's design. There was a lot of uncertainty as to whether battleships could survive the new combat environment, and so a number of different designs were prepared. A new variant of 16-inch gun was proposed for the main armament, but the ship itself now had many possible variants. One proposed a ship of 50,000 tons with 12 of the new 4.5-inch guns in twin mounts, replacing the 5.25-inch weapons and numerous new sextuple 40mm Bofors guns. It was now 830 feet long, but to improve speed and endurance, a sub-variant of this, and 865 feet long with 2 more 4.5-inch mounts, was also considered. This edition had a displacement of nearly 60,000 tons. Whilst these ships would have been very intimidating, there was still more to come. Whilst impressive, these designs were still vulnerable to certain weapons that were either in development or being tested. At this point things started to go a bit crazy. In an effort to save weight and expense, and also because most of the new threats were either bombs or missiles, a series of increasingly schizophrenic designs were prepared that cut the main armament down to 6 guns in a variety of layouts, 1 triple turret forward and 1 aft, 2 triples forward, or 3 twins in the original layout. Belt armor was reduced to little or nothing in exchange for heavy deck armor, a huge underwater protection system, high speed, and a frankly insane level of anti-aircraft firepower. This culminated in a design with 2 triple turrets forward fitted with an auto-loading mechanism, giving a rate of fire that would actually send more shells downrange per minute than the older design with 3 triple turrets, and a carrier deck on the back, somewhat like some wartime Japanese refitted battleships. This would carry fighters, torpedo bombers, and charge around at 30 knots or more, presumably trying to do everything at once. Fortunately for all concerned, one British admiral, after seeing this proposal and presumably spilling his tea and dropping his monocle, uttered the following: "The functions and requirements of carriers and of surface gun platforms are entirely incompatible. The conceptions of these designs is evidently the result of an unresolved contest between a conscious acceptance of aircraft and a subconscious desire for a 1914 fleet. These abortions are the results of a psychological maladjustment." But the crazy train had not yet reached its final stop. The design teams were asked to also produce a sketch design that could actually stand up to all current and anticipated threats whilst carrying the original weapons loadout. Bear in mind that at this point you were talking about repelling battleships like Yamato and Iowa, dealing with rocket-powered supersonic guided missiles armed with 1,000-pound or greater warheads, as well as homing torpedoes and possibly even nearby atomic blasts. You might think such a ship was impossible, but that is why you are not a naval designer. Proudly, the design team presented their findings. Their proposed ship would carry 9 16-inch guns, 16 5.25-inch guns, 64 40mm guns, 24 20mm guns, be capable of 32 knots, and have no less than 18 inches of belt armor, 9 inches of deck armor, and displace nearly 100,000 tons with a length of 1,000 feet. To give you some idea of scale, that is a battleship of about the same size, displacement, and speed as an Nimitz-class nuclear-powered aircraft carrier. To give you some idea of this insanity, here are some pictures of the already huge Iowa-class battleships next to Nimitz-class carriers. By this point it was clear that battleships, along with apparently common sense and an appreciation of reality, had long since left the realms of sensibility and established a firm hold in fantasy land, so it should come as little surprise that at this point the whole idea sort of died out without much formal ceremony. That's it for this video. Thanks for watching. If you have a comment or suggestion for a ship to review, let us know in the comments below.